Hello, I am fixing this. There we go. Hello, and welcome to this Bible study. It appears that Facebook has kept me from doing a widescreen on live videos, which I'm annoyed about because I hate portrait mode, but I guess we'll just work through that. So for those watching on YouTube, if you wouldn't mind doing a quick breathing exercise, we're just going to take 3 deep breaths. We're just gonna go in and out and in and out. Fantastic. So I like to start the Bible study with a quiet meditative worship song, but you know, it's YouTube, so I can't actually play it because I'll get copyrighted. But if you go into the description of the video, it's gonna be like the first thing, there's gonna be a quiet worship song, and if you wouldn't mind clicking on that link and just listen to the song, you can if you know the words, which, you know, if you've been a Christian a while, you're gonna know the words to this one, but you can sing along to it quietly to yourself, you know, maybe sway along to it, or you can just like keep doing your deep breathing, or just like reflect on the lyrics, or, you know, whatever gets you into that meditative headspace. Do that. And then when you're done listening to that video, then come back to this one and you can watch the rest of the Bible study. So yeah, do that. Yes. I'm trying to remember what I say. So if you wouldn't mind, you can pause the video to watch the worship song right now. And you're back. I hope you enjoyed it. It's a classic. Or I don't even know if it's old enough to be a classic, but it feels like it should be. So yeah, we're doing chapter 15 of Genesis today. Fun fact about this chapter: Enduring Word didn't say anything about it that I disagreed with. Who knew it was possible? It's another pretty straightforward chapter. There's one relatively interesting tidbit, but it's, you know, it's still pretty straightforward. So let's just get into it. So the chapter starts. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. Okay, so God comes to talk to us in many different forms. Sometimes it's like auditory only. Sometimes it's just like a gut feeling. Sometimes he's visually apparent. Maybe like he's just like a thing or person, you know, it varies. We don't know exactly what God looked like in this instance, but it was likely visual, since God told him to not be afraid, implying his mere presence might startle Abram without even having to say anything. If he came in like some weird, trippy, ethereal form, as angels do sometimes, that might by itself be cause for some concern to like the average viewer. But if God appeared to Abram as a normal looking person, that could also make Abram jumpy, since he you know, he's fresh from a battle and he likely made many enemies because of it. Strange men that pop up out of nowhere are a little bit suspicious after stuff like that, but either way, God lets him know right off the bat that he's cool. He also seems to validate Abram's decision to not take Sodom's reward for this battle victory. God says he will protect him, as a shield does, from the enemies he made, but he will also reward Abram, probably better than Sodom ever could. So Abram isn't missing out in any way. In this context, he's likely referring to the legacy of Israel, but in general, sometimes God's great reward is simply his presence, his active role in your life. And that's a pretty cool thing too, make no mistake. Regardless of what you get in this life, you will be given the ultimate gift of eternal peace in the next life, should we put our faith in God. Just wanted to throw that out there. It just zooms in on my face. I hate that so much. Anyways, next verse. But Abram said, O Lord, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eli. I was practicing this name, and I had it down. What keeps happening? Eliezer of Damascus. Eliezer. And Abram said, you have given me no offspring, and so a slave born in my house is to be my heir. So in case you missed that, Eliezer, that's what it was, is Abram's top servant, his right-hand man, and since Abram doesn't have any kids yet, he was going to give his inheritance to him upon his passing. God had promised Abram a great reward, but all Abram wants is that kid that God promised. Eliezer is, by all accounts, a great guy who probably deserves at least a little something, but Abram would much rather give his inheritance to his child. We know God's going to fulfill that promise eventually, but so we tend to see Abram as impatient in this story. But keep in mind, at this point, Abram's about in his mid-80s, I want to say, so it feels very unlikely at this point. Imagine being 80 and God still hasn't given you those kids he promised. I think the majority of people would be like, what the fuck? This is a good example. This is also a good example of venting your frustrations and doubts to God. A lot of Christians say doing what Abram is doing is sinful and you should never question God. This is simply unbiblical, however. God would rather you talk to him directly about your stressors than keep it pent up inside. Letting it eat away at you to the point where an opening for possible satanic influences are made and you end up being lost forever. The trick is to talk to God in good faith. Assume that he does have a reasonable answer and yearn for it to come out. You're less likely to hear that answer if you're coming in expecting to hear either silence or cruelty. It's not impossible. You might still get something. You might still get your answer, but you do make it harder for yourself when you're not opening yourself up to those truths. So just something to be aware of. That's it for that part. So next verse. But the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue shall be your heir. So I feel a little bad for Eliezer. God just cut him out of the will like that. I hope he gets a bonus at least. I don't want an Aristocats situation for him. But anyways, God gives Abram the reassurance that he is getting a biological child. It's not going to be some kind of adoption or spiritual situation like it might have been for Eliezer. It's a literal, physical child that he is the father of. God is not leaving any room for misinterpretation, though Sarai is eventually going to twist that around anyways. God did his part on that one. Besides the point, though, keep in mind, after God says this, it's still going to be another 15 or 20 years before it actually happens. Sometimes we think when God says something is going to happen, we think he means like right now, but sometimes he doesn't. Just another thing to be aware of. So next verse is, he brought him outside and said, "Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. So here, according to Enduring Word, I didn't bother double checking with other sources, or I probably should have, but this, according to them, is the first time in the Bible where the word believed is used, as well as, at least in this context, as well as God considering someone righteous because of that belief. It's at least one of the first examples of being saved by faith. Abram didn't do anything. If he did anything morally good to make him be seen as righteous, that would make him the only one responsible for his righteousness. He'd have only himself to congratulate. God may have made some rules or expectations, but Abram followed them and met them. But if he followed them and met them, it's only ever going to be his will that would allow him to do that. And that might seem fine. We were built with a nature to want to do good, but we also chose to have a nature that wants to do bad. God does not have that nature in the slightest. So even the tiniest bit of bad is absolutely abhorrent to him. We'd all be considered evil in his sights. But if that, and if that were the system that God promoted, we'd live in a very judgmental and legalistic society. I mean, we kind of do, but it's not supposed to be that way, to be clear. And we're just constantly trying to make sure we're doing more good than bad, and we're trying to make up for the bad we inevitably commit in some way. But it'd be out of fear of punishment rather than simply doing good for goodness sake. It'd be a generally stressful and impossible task for us broken humans. It's just, it's not a good time for anyone. So God does not base salvation or righteousness on what you do so much as where you put your finger. It's so itchy. What guides you in life? What's your top priority? If it's God, you're considered saved, and all those righteous works will likely follow to the best of their ability afterwards anyways. You'll do good because God does good, and you want to emulate him, not impress him, by basing our salvation off of faith, we make ourselves rely on God solely instead of our own flailing wills. It's more of a relationship than a checklist where you're allowed to stumble around occasionally. There's some room for error. As long as your sights are ultimately set on him, you're good. Good with a capital G. It's also worth noting that Abram was uncircumcised when God considered him righteous. Just wanted to throw that out there real quick, father of the Jews. Next verse. Then he said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess." But he said, "O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" Now, it seems that Abram backslid a bit here. He did believe God for a moment, and then he went right back to questioning him. In all fairness, there's some confusion among scholars as to whether or not this was written chronologically. You know how those ancient Hebrew writers are about chronology, and we've discussed this multiple times. I personally think it could work either way. Maybe the writers were trying to give us the end result ahead of time, so we'd know the future events would eventually lead back to Abram believing in God's promise, just to give us that insight and perspective. God is going to knock Abram down a little, and as you'll see, just like a little bit, so it might be helpful to know that it leads to building him back up again, in case you're wondering, why is God doing this? Why is he saying these things? That's why. Or Abram in fact believed, but as some time passed, either a few seconds or a few days, we don't know chronology, you can't expect chronology in the early books of the Bible, or even in the New Testament really, but those creeping doubts popped up again, and Abram felt the need to press God further, as all believers inevitably do. So really, I personally don't see a problem with either scenario, and I welcome you to use whichever one encourages your present circumstances. Either God is letting you slide down further in order to better pull you up again, or you're having natural doubts after a big spiritual revelation, and God will build you back up from that too. You'll end up stronger for it regardless. So God gives him the, I got you this far, haven't I? When he references bringing him out of Ur. But Abram still isn't sure, since having a child when you're 100 is a bit different from going from one location to the other. He wants some kind of tangible proof or assurance that this is actually happening. It's not a godly stance to question it, but it is human and understandable. Not only does he not have a kid yet, but he also doesn't even have any kind of deed or agreement with the surrounding tribes that this is his land. It's all up in the air, even after many decades of waiting. So what does God do to assure him? Let's find out in the next verse. So he said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. He brought him all these and cut them in two, laying each half over against the other, but he did not cut the birds in two. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. So, if you're like me, you're wondering what the fuck is going on in this. Why did God make Abram cut up those animals like that? Well, apparently, upon further research, I discovered that back then, important contracts were sealed using sacrificial animals. It's like a type of blood pact. You cut up the animals in halves, I assume to represent the two people involved in the contract, and they're parts of the deal, and then the participants walk around the pieces while chanting, God made a covenant, or more literally, God cut a covenant. The broken pieces of the animals also excuse me. Broken pieces of the animals also represented what would happen if anyone broke the contract. If you go back on this deal, you're going to end up like these animals, cut up and your blood's everywhere type of thing. So Abram is essentially trying to get God to agree to a type of ritualistic verbal contract. A get that shit in writing kind of thing. A blood pact. Get that shit in writing. Definitely messy and weird by today's standards, and I'm not sure how well it'd hold up in a court of law, but there's probably wasn't as many courts back then anyways, so whatever. I also think, I'm not sure, but I think you need only one animal for this type of practice, but probably God wanted to emphasize how serious he was about this, so multiple animals were brought in. One commentator, Matthew Poole, thinks that the birds weren't divided, either because the two holds were considered to be the halves of each other. They're just so small, you might as well just consider them halves by themselves. Or they were complementary sacrifices that weren't a part of the covenant. It's just like, hey, when you're like making a deal with somebody, you gotta throw a little extra in. It's just cordial. Another commentator known as Gill implies they symbolize how the two will be made whole if the covenant is kept. So it's like the opposite of like you're going to be cut up into pieces if you don't follow this contract. Like if you do follow this contract, then you won't be cut up into little pieces. You can be like the birds. Do you want to be like the birds or do you want to be like the livestock kind of a thing? There's a whole Bible Hub commentary article linked in the sources that weighs all the possibilities, but those seem to be the popular reasons as a heads up. Probably should have looked up. I'm kind of just now thinking, like, why did they have to be 3 years old also? I'm just now wondering that. I'll probably look it up after I'm done with this and let you know in the comments. But that's why the birds weren't cut up. We figured that out at least. Notice also how God made Abram wait again. Abram was likely expecting God to come and like seal the deal, like as soon as he was done slaughtering the ceremonial animals, but he did not. In fact, he had Abram wait all day and had him fighting off vultures as he waited. And I actually find this to be a very apt metaphor for waiting on God. God tells us to do something, but he doesn't give us like a timeline of when those things are going to happen, so we have to wait. And the longer we wait, the more birds of prey start showing up and start to try to take your piece, both types of piece, your piece of the animal and also your piece. And you gotta fend those little shits off so you're ready for the Lord's arrival. It's a very common scenario, so I think that was a good visualization on God's part. When God does finally show up around nightfall, he got Abram to pass out and sent him spiraling into darkness. Not at all what Abram expected, most likely. Fun fact though, the original word used for deep sleep is often used to imply a divine revelation is a coming. So it was an instructive darkness, as we'll see in the next verse, which is. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for yourself, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." So here, God is basically letting Abram know that these descendants that he wants so bad are in for a tough time. This deal isn't all sunshine and roses. His family is going to end up slaves in a foreign land, obviously Egypt, but God had to be coy. They're going to end up in this foreign land for 400 years before they finally come back to the promised land. But they'll come back absolutely dripping, and Abram's going to die peacefully at an old age anyways, before like all of this happens. So it's not like a huge deal. It doesn't really affect Abram directly. God just wants Abram to be aware of the details of this thing. He's so eager to have happen. He's explaining the fine print, the downside of the covenant, as any good lawyer would. So that's cool. the really interesting part is in the last verse, which is, when the sun had gone down and it was dark, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, and the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. So, we're going to be ending on a slight rant. I had to go outside and do a word for this one since they didn't explain it like super well, but I found this other nice commentary article that does, which will of course be linked in the sources section of the description. In it explains what's the deal with the fire pot and the torch. Other translations and commentaries describe the fire as a small furnace or portable oven, by the way, which I think is more comprehensible description, so I'm going to use that more often going forward with this. Anyways, the article, which comes from the site called Never Thirsty, which is a cool name, by the way, it explains that the flaming torch and the smoking furnace are representative figures of God's presence. That is, they are both God, and they walk around the animals, which, as we now know, is how one signs a contract in this behemoth. That's not what I'm trying to say. Neanderthal time. And note how Abram didn't end up actually signing this deal at all. He didn't walk around. It was just God doing this. He only witnessed the two sides of God doing the signing. This actually shows how God is acting as both parties of this covenant. Abram is not liable for anything. It's entirely on God. This ensures that the covenant could not be broken, as God does not break covenants. Had Abram signed the contract as he wanted to, there would have been a chance for failure, a very high chance for failure. If Abram didn't hold up his end, whatever that would have been, the contract would have been broken, and God wouldn't have held up his end in return. And God wanted to set up this anxious and doubtful man up for success, so he could reward him fully as God wanted to. You see how God's wants are better than our own. It's also not going to be the first time that God represents both himself and also humanity. That's like basically what the entire New Testament is about. So that's fun. That's a fun thing to watch. Now, obviously, you need two separate entities to sign a contract. So the reason for God splitting himself is clear enough. But why a smoking oven and a flaming torch? Why not just two people, or like even any other random object? Like, why was it specifically a smoking oven and a flaming torch? It's actually not the first time you see God present himself as fire and or smoke either. You see it more in Exodus and Chronicles. But what's like the meaning behind it? What's the symbology? Well, there's no obvious or clear answer, but scholars have come up with some pretty likely ones, I think. The fire, it could represent God's consuming, cleansing zeal, as well as his approaching holiness, unapproachable holiness. The smoke could symbolize his divine judgment, the original, y'all want all this smoke kind of a thing. Maybe the flame is a simple holy light illusion, the good part of the covenant, while the smoke is like the dark, judgy downside of it. The smoke of the smoke of destruction and the light of salvation. Generally speaking, based on that, it could be a symbol of what this covenant offers. and will bring. There are references to Egypt. There are also references to Egypt being called a furnace in Deuteronomy, so maybe that's all it is. The Egypt part of the deal that was previously discussed prior to signing. There's also other furnace and flame pairings in Zechariah, where Judah brings both smoke and flame to its enemies. Theologians seem to understand the flame metaphor more than the smoke one, which I actually find to be fitting. They seem to generally agree that smoke symbolizes some kind of judgment or trial. It's somewhere in that realm. These things are often elusive and hidden and have a tendency to blur the vision. So it makes sense that the smoke symbol is less clear. It also fits that the smoke comes from a portable oven, as, the vibe of judgment can come and go as it pleases and follow you around as needed. It's all very difficult events and periods that have the potential to make or break your faith depending on how you respond to it. It's a blessing, therefore, that the flame is better understood as the light of God. We should be more focused on the light than the smoke. If we can focus on this light, staying true to God, then we have less of a likelihood to be bothered by the smoke. Smoke is still gonna be a bit bothersome, as anyone who's been around a campfire knows, but light from the fire remains inviting and draws us close. It's a delicate balance that keeps us humble. Either way, God ends the covenant by spelling out the specific lands that the future Israel will acquire. This is to make it clear that this is not going to be a symbolic gesture. Abram's descendants will get physical, tangible lands, ones that are currently occupied by others, implying that these people will eventually get pushed out to make way for God's chosen people. And that does eventually happen, as a matter of fact. Once King Solomon comes into the picture, they get all of this land. It happens. Though, like all blessings in a broken world, it doesn't last. Israel gets taken over by invaders because its people can't keep its shit together, but fear not. Soon, the whole world will be as Israel was meant to be, as Eden was, and you won't need to be a direct descendant of Abram to enjoy it. In fact, mortal blood is generally not enough to guarantee a place in this new world. What's required to enter, what you really need, is the blood of Jesus, as well as the faith in the one true God. Believe, and you will achieve. Sorry, I had to rhyme it. I couldn't help it. But so concludes this chapter of Genesis, as well as the new Revised Standard Version series. The next 5 chapters, we're going to be trying 21st century King James, which I am prejudiced against, but it's the new version of it, so it's not going to have the these and thous as far as I can tell, so it should at least be, we should still be able to understand what it's saying. But yeah, so now we just have prayer requests to do. We got some updates on it. So my lovely mother seems to have found a church, or at least churchy friends, and also a job, so this is probably going to be the last time we're going to be praying for that. We're going to be thanking God for that one. And I still need to pray for my lovely friend, my lovely unnamed friend who has health issues and general anxiety issues. And my dad is also living his best life right now, so we're gonna thank God for that. But also, my lovely, beautiful, unvaccinated father got COVID. He has COVID, you guys, and he's type 1 diabetic, so that's so great, you guys. So we're gonna pray that he doesn't die, and that's about it for other people's prayers. If you would like to add to this list, if you have something you would like prayer about, either something that's helpful, or something you need help with, or you just want to thank God for something, let me know in the comments. I also like to pray about myself. So what's going on in my life? I'm actually been pretty good lately. I actually my birthday was yesterday, and it was very chill. I turned 26, and I guess that's the age where you kind of don't care about your birthday, because it was just a normal Tuesday for me. Just kind of went to worked on Bible study notes, and that was about it. I got to kind of hang out with my sister a little bit and her family, so that was nice. So yeah, I kind of did something. She gave me some cheesecake, which was very nice. Thank you, Sika, for giving me cheesecake. But yeah, that's nothing new. So I guess I'll just thank God for keeping it Gucci. Yeah, so let's do that. So God, thank you for bringing all of the people to this video to watch. I want to thank you for helping my mom get a job and finding her some friends. She seems to be doing a lot better now, so thank you for helping her with that. I do want to pray for my friend who still is having trouble with her health, and just mental and physical. Just kind of keep her from freaking out too much. Help her to feel that your presence is present and you are still taking an active role in her life. And you know what she needs, to do that. I encourage you to do that. I also want to pray for my dad. Thank you for putting more peace in his life, but also, he's got a pretty contagious disease that's killing a lot of people, and it's especially killing the immunocompromised, which he definitely is. So, I just like to pray that, maybe don't let him die from that. I don't know, I guess, your timing and everything, but, at the very least, keep the suffering to a minimum. It's a very unfortunate disease, but I just pray that he just doesn't get any more serious than that, because I feel like we were just starting to get cool, and that'd be kind of lame if he just died right when we were starting to get cool again. Yeah, just don't kill my dad. And as for me, I also want to thank you for keeping my depression to a minimum, keeping the anxiety to a minimum. Thank you for bringing peace in my life as well. I just pray that it continues, or at least, when the next trigger comes, that I don't take it as seriously. I trust you to, do what is needed. I just pray that, when those trials come, that I and the people around me handle it well. And you can guide us with that. So that is all. So thank you again. We love you, and amen. You did it, guys. So yeah, like I said again, if you have prayer requests, let me know in the comments. And also, if you have questions about the passage, or you would like to add to the discussion, I'm probably going to add a little bit, because I just thought of things that I kind of wish I had thought about beforehand, so I might add something in the comments. But if you have comments, feel free to add those. And that is the Bible study part. I'm gonna end this video, but there's gonna be for the Facebook people, there's gonna be a loud worship part. So, stick around for that. But for those watching on YouTube, just go into the description, and it's gonna be right under the quiet worship. There's gonna be a loud worship link. Follow that, listen to it, pop along, dance along to it. It's fun. Get that blood moving. It's just fun to do that. I like to end it on a fun note. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I will see you next week. Bye.